Right, just to get this out of the way early, this is an opinion piece, so I'm going to just start off with a massive hyperbolic personal opinion, and then that way it's all over and done with. I think that more care and more love went into the old Star Wars games that I played as a kid than went into the recent Battlefront games. There. LucasArts may well have been a flawed developer, I'm happy to admit that, no different really to any, but it is my opinion that the people who were working at LucasArts really cared about what they were doing. Everything which came out of the LucasArts studio was made with that love, and I think that that love shines through. And this is why I think the Star Wars Expanded Universe is so special. It was the Star Wars Expanded Universe novels that actually got 13-year-old me into Star Wars in the first place. And then it was the Star Wars PC games, which came after, that completely sold me. The original trilogy may well have laid the groundwork, but it was the EU which fleshed out that universe and really fueled the fires of my imagination. So one example I can give you really early on is Darth Maul, right? Look at this guy. I remember watching the episode 1 trailer when I was 13, I think. Me and some friends downloaded it over dial-up and we had to span it over 11 floppy disks to bring it into school to show some of the other kids. You have no idea. And I thought this guy was going to be like the new Darth Vader or like the old Darth Vader, whatever. I thought he was going to be massive. And then he was only in one film. That crushed me. What was even worse though is that he doesn't really even do anything in that one film. Like, yeah, he's really wicked cool with a lightsaber, but other than looking really cool, it wasn't really anything to it. But it was all saved by the EU. The EU comic books, which came out around the same time as episode 1, were awesome. And so were the books, which then came along and fleshed out Maul's character further. And then putting Maul into the Clone Wars cartoon just went one step further, and they gave us this nuanced, three-dimensional character that you could actually care about. It was the EU that made Darth Maul one of my favourite baddies in all of Star Wars. The way I think of it is the films are like a 2-hour window into the Star Wars universe, but it's the EU that fleshes it out. The EU fleshed out every character, it fleshes out every location. Who's she? What's that? How did that get there? Every single thing is explained. Given the fullness of time, and with so many of these books and these comics, everything got a name and everything got a backstory. And there is some part of my brain buried deep in there that really responds to stuff like this. I don't know what it is, but I just drank this up. Off the top of my head, I can tell you now, Han Solo's gun, DL-44. That droid that blows up in the first film, R5-D4. Garindan, Bib Fortuna, Hobby. This isn't anything I've looked up. I just have a huge knowledge of this stuff just from reading all these books and reading all these comics. Even stuff that you don't even see on screen, things that people just mention. Eventually that all got explained too, and I drank it up. Long before Rogue One explained who stole the Death Star plans, I already had dark forces. In 1991, I got to play as Kyle Katarn, mercenary for hire, and I got to infiltrate the Imperial base on Danuta. I got to steal the plans for the Death Star. That was awesome. The EU gave me a window into probably one of the most evocative corners of the Star Wars backstory. Now, for the record, I really like Rogue One. I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to put down on the film, but I will always prefer in my heart this far more intimate story about this lone agent infiltrating an Imperial base to steal the plans. And what was always better was that I got to do it myself. To a 90s kid like me, these EU stories were my Star Wars sequels. It's hard to believe now, but when I was a kid, there were no Star Wars prequels, there were no Star Wars sequels, and actually, there weren't any plans for them either. They weren't even showing the films on the telly when I was growing up. The only way to get more Star Wars was with these books, with these comic books, and with these computer games. It was the EU, especially the games, that let me take my first step into that larger world, to actually take part in the Star Wars universe in a way that nothing else could let me. And when the EU started out, there were no real rules at all, and there wasn't actually a huge amount of original material to draw inspiration from. What this meant was that the writers of this stuff were pretty much doing whatever they wanted and making it up as they went along. And these writers, they weren't just expanding on what we'd seen in the films, but they actually started to add completely new stories into the mythos of their own devising. And more amazingly is nobody even cared at the beginning, so the expanded universe was just this realm of infinite creative possibility. Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc. Yeah, sure, why not? Enjoy yourself. Hey, what about a Wookiee Jedi? Yes, mate, absolutely fine, no problem at all. This was fertile ground for these writers just to go nuts. We had a clone grown from Luke's severed hand on Cloud City. We had zombie stormtroopers. The Emperor had a three-eyed son. The Emperor had another three-eyed son. The Emperor's ghost possessed a sexy clone body. If you're one of those people that said Starkiller was too powerful when he brought down a Star Destroyer, then don't worry, mate, because the Emperor's sexy clone I just mentioned, he could create wormholes by using the Force, and Luke once closed a black hole using it. Things may well have got wild, yes, fine, but this is why I love the EU. A lot of people on the internet like to harp on about how bad some of these ideas were. If you do a Google search for like worst EU stories, then you're just going to see the same half dozen things just parroted over and over again in the internet echo chamber. And the truth of the matter is, those half dozen things aren't even that bad. People just really love to complain about stuff on the internet. Who knew? Conversely though, what I loved about this stuff was that unparalleled creativity. Each new creator would come onto the project and they'd add something new, or they'd introduce some new idea, and then the next writer would take that idea and then expand on it, and then they'd add their own new thing, and then so on and so on. Shadows of the Empire is a great example of this, and really it deserves its own video. Shadows of the Empire was a massive project which saw Lucasfilm trying to inject a new episode in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Now, it had a book, it had a comic, it had toys, it had computer games, it even had its own score written specifically for it. It was basically a whole film but without the film. And it is one of my absolute favourite parts of the EU, because this is Lucasfilm just completely embracing this crazy creative potential. And another one, the TIE Fighter game, that had come previously, and that had also told another little story in between Empire and Jedi. But in that one, you actually got to play as the Empire. Amazing. Not only are these games expanding on what already existed in the films, but they're filling in the gaps. They're adding content where nothing existed before. I've mentioned Battlefront 2 in a lot of other of my videos, and one thing that I say a lot is that I just love the single player campaign in this game. The game is basically set over really every major battle of the first two film trilogies, from the Clone Wars all the way up to the Battle of Hoth. So if you've seen the films, then you've got the historical context from those. But what's wicked here is you're seeing these events from the perspective of a stormtrooper. You're on the other side of the fence this time. And the way this story and these other stories I've mentioned, they interconnect with one another and with the original trilogy, for me it just feels so rewarding to see a character's name, or maybe a planet's name, that I recognise from maybe another novel or another part of the expanded universe. It just made me feel really connected to that universe, and it made that universe feel connected together. I found it hard to articulate when I was writing this script exactly why I love that feeling. It's possible that I'm just mad, but if you've made it this far, then thanks. There's more. The interconnectedness that I just mentioned was often quite hammy. I don't mind admitting that. When you read about how Han Solo got his jacket because he stole it off of Greedo, and that's why Greedo doesn't like him, then yeah, that's pretty stupid. But it's also kind of funny, you know, like I still enjoy that. It's cheesy, but I like it. Darth Vader built C-3PO as a small boy, and Ponda Baba is randomly in Rogue One, and that's canon. So if they can get away with it in canon, then I feel like the EU's allowed to do a bunch of this stupid stuff as well. Because it seems to me that one of the founding principles of the Star Wars universe is no matter how big this universe is, no matter how obscure or fleeting a character is, somehow, apparently, everything has to be linked together. It's like there was just this big inside joke at Lucasfilm just to see how convoluted and how crazy everything could get and have it all still work. There's so much continuity across so many formats, and for the most part, it does actually work. Did you know that one sand trooper who says, "Look sir, droids," did you know he defected from the Empire and he's the one who told the rebels how to trip up AT-ATs? Did you know this one random Tusken Raider from Masters of Teräs Käsi is actually the only survivor of Anakin's massacre in Attack of the Clones? Yeah, it didn't always work, and frankly, more often than not, it made more problems than it solved. Boba Fett turns up in multiple places at the same time. Loads of different people all stole the plans for the Death Star at the same time. Shaak-Ti dies like 3 different times. It's crazy, but I still like it. It got so out of hand, in fact, that Lucasfilm had to invent a canon structure to try to iron out all the different creases, but they still messed it up all the time anyway. But on a macro scale, if you zoom out and look at the whole thing as one big picture, it is amazing. It's a massive achievement to have all these different forms of media all coming together and all working together as one big contiguous whole. whacking another secret chapter in between episode 3 and A New Hope about how Darth Vader had a secret apprentice and accidentally started the Rebel Alliance, and having it work with 20 years of continuity behind it, including characters from the EU in the story, and still have it work? Incredible. The Force Unleashed is a fan favourite for a lot of reasons, and it's not least because of how well it fits into the established continuity. A lot of the work that The Force Unleashed did has been redone in the more recent Rebels cartoon, but there are still plenty of us who love the story of Starkiller. The Force Unleashed is a really good example of what I've been talking about in this video. It fills in the context of the existing film universe, it adds in new characters and new story, and it ties everything together almost perfectly. It's beautiful. And if I don't stop now, this is just going to end up being a 2-hour-long ramble where I just list out all the things I like about Star Wars and why I like them all so much. Now, before anybody says it, yes, I completely admit that the storytelling was flawed. I completely admit the continuity was riddled with holes, and a lot of the ideas were just straight up mental. But I will remain a firm apologist for the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Without the EU, we never would have had General Grievous, we wouldn't have had Boba Fett, we wouldn't have had Admiral Thrawn, we wouldn't have had Coruscant, Kashyyyk, and Emperor Palpatine would have never got a surname. Plus, we got Hammerhead Corvettes, Rancor riding Night Sisters, Darth Revan. Oh wait, no, I'm doing that thing that I just said I wasn't going to do. Right, so moving on. In 2014, Disney renamed the expanded universe the Star Wars Legends Continuity, and they rendered the whole thing non-canon in order to make room for Star Wars Rebels and this new Star Wars trilogy. Fine, I really like Rebels, I really like the new film trilogy, but I'm not prepared to sideline all my old books and all my old Star Wars games. Like a lot of older Star Wars fans, I think the Star Wars Expanded Universe, it means a lot to me. There's a lot of nostalgia connected to it, and I will always treasure the time that I got to spend inside that world. Crucially, none of that is ever going to be taken away from me. New stories in the Star Wars mythos aren't taking anything away from the time that I spent there, and I will always have these awesome memories. Nobody's ruining my childhood by bringing new things out. I think that the range of styles and that wild creativity is what made me fall in love with Star Wars in the first place, and so I'm happy for people to continue that torch onwards, and I'm sure I will continue to enjoy Star Wars for many years to come. If you also like anything from the Star Wars Expanded Universe, from the pre-2014 Legends continuity, whether it's a book, a comic, a film, leave me a comment, because I will carry on chatting about this for weeks and weeks and months, and I do this. So please drop me a comment, and if you like Star Wars, check out some of the other videos, hit subscribe, that'd be awesome. Thanks very much for watching, cheers and ta-da.